Hi everybody, welcome to another Friday Sessions. Hope you're all keeping well and keeping safe, given everything that's going on at the moment. Today's session we're going to be looking at Disguise fundamentals, so really your first day in Disguise, things, the kind of foundation knowledge that you need to get in order to kind of move on to more advanced stuff. For this session, I'm going to assume that you kind of don't know anything about Disguise. I'm sure that's not the case for most people watching, as yeah, the questions we've had so far indicate that you've all got some fairly good experience. But we're just going to start right from the basics and head right through. See where we can get in an hour. So this is the D3 manager. Skipping back to a little bit before that, if I bring in a quick web browser, if you ever want to grab the latest version of Disguise, you can go to download.disguise.one, and this will always give you the latest version of Disguise. And there's occasionally some little sort of GIFs and videos based on the new features and what have you. So you could download that. It actually looks like that there's a slightly newer version than the one that I'm going to be running today, but I think anybody wants to sit and watch me update my system. So that's where you get Disguise. I've actually downloaded the D3 Media Pack, so if you go into resources, I can never remember which one this is under, I think it's demo projects. There's a media pack that you can download, which just has some movies and models and stuff like that. That's going to make doing this demonstration a little bit more interesting. So once we've got that and we've got Disguise installed, our entry point to being able to use it is D3 Manager, and this is where we organise the projects that we have on our system. Here's a couple from the webinar that I did last week. If I was to go File, New Project, this is how we create a new project. I'll call this the There we go. So by going File New, we've generated a new project there. I can right click on that and go to Open Project Folder. Now this is basically everything that is held inside this this folder is your Disguise project. So if you wanted to pick it up from your laptop or your production machine and move that to a Disguise server, you would just copy this folder onto a SSD or a hard drive and move that over. If I go up a folder, you can see these are the projects that are in the D3 Manager are also folders in this. So this top level folder is just the folder that my D3 Manager looks at, and everything else inside that is a project. There's a few folders that turn up just in the sort of day-to-day running of Disguise: Common, Internal, and Start, the binary file holding your machine info. So those can safely be ignored. They need to be there in order for Disguise to be able to run. So if we pop back inside our project folder, the main place you're going to be spending some time here is in the objects folder. So if we go inside there, this is where all the assets for your project are going to live. So the titles of these folders are relatively self-explanatory. Audio files, DX texture is for still images like PNGs or JPEGs, although it gets used a lot less now than it used to, as we now, from a media standpoint, put our PNGs and images in the video file folder. LUT file is for LUTs or lookup tables. Mesh files are for custom meshes. Notch files are for your DFX files. Recording file is something that you can generate from inside of Disguise. We probably won't get onto that today, but we'll maybe look at that next week. And then video file is almost certainly where you're going to spend most of your time. This is where the the majority of your all of your media, your videos, PNGs, still images, get put in order to upload them to your system. If I just open up the D3 media folder that I grabbed earlier, you can see inside the video file folder it's a collection of extra assets. I'm just going to basically copy them all in, skip any duplicates, and then let's have a look. I think these are all the same meshes that we have by default, so there's not much to be gained by doing that. Seems like there's some extra flat art, some extra still images, and then we've got an audio file as well. Cool. Okay. So if we go back to the top level, our .d3 file is where all the it's essentially your project file. We can launch your project by double clicking on your .d3, or if we're going to D3 Manager by double clicking on your project name, or going down to run here and clicking run. So if I wanted to run a different project, I would just select that and then hit the run button. So I'm going to select the one we just generated and hit run. Just wait while Disguise opens. Perfect. So this is what you'll see when you start a blank Disguise project. You have a puck, which is our guy. We have a projector and we have a surface. This whole window that we're looking at here is our 3D visualizer, and I can left click anywhere in the view. I can left click on an object, so like a surface, and then by moving the mouse I can pan around or orbit around the scene. If I do the same with the mouse button, middle mouse button, I can dolly in and out by scrolling up and down. I can do the same by right clicking and dollying in and out. So that's just right clicking and moving the mouse up and down. I can hold the tab button on the keyboard, and that pans things left and right, up and down. So that's how we navigate our 3D viewport. If we have a look along the top, there is an information bar, or sort of a menu bar, that will allow us to get into some of the menus that we're going to need to be in to set up our Disguise project. And then along the bottom here we see the timeline. So this is, by default we have a single track in the project. If I was to press play, you'd see that start moving on sort of from left to right in quite a linear fashion. So this, if you've ever done any video editing using Premiere or Final Cut Pro or anything like that, hopefully this will become quite familiar to you as we start adding modules and generating a show. Fairly new to the most recent version of Disguise, we now have 3D widgets within the viewport. So if you can see, there is an axis here, and we see that because our 3D menu is open. So if we disappear into the bottom right, I think my image, the image of my camera might be obscuring that for your view. But if you have a look in in fact I could probably turn that off. There we go. If you have a look there, there is a little widget on the top of the timeline which we can turn our 3D menu on and off, like that. And then by using the handles in the on the axis, we can use this to move objects in the scene around. So that's fairly handy, and if you have any background working in 3D software, that probably feels quite familiar to you. There's also you can rotate, you can scale, and there's we can change between object mode and world mode, which affects the way that the move, scale, and rotate functions actually work. So just gonna Control Z, get me back to where we were when we started the project. If we look along the top here, there's the D3 logo. We can right click that and we have a number of different options that relate to your project. You click the About, it'll tell you the type of license that you're running, the major and minor versions, and the branch version. You can also drop that down and see what your what notch licenses you have in your system. The main reason for knowing about this is if you have any issues with your project or you have any concerns, it's really useful when you are contacting Disguise support to give them the build number you're working on, and that can help them understand where in the code base they need to look to help you out. Right click on the top again just to reopen that. Project settings is a little bit more complete. You can, although I tend not to, generate new projects and archive projects from the top here. We can do object archive, which doesn't really make sense as we have this started up, as we're just setting the project up. But once you have done a lot of programming and have added a lot of stuff to the timeline, your project is going to increase in size quite significantly. And this is a way to archive off the unused objects, so the unused video, unused audio, into a separate folder to remove that, to allow you to help reduce the size of your project, which is going to make it easier to move between systems or help you manage if you have hard drive limitations. If you've reached the limit of the hard drive in your system, then this is a really useful thing to do. Tooltips, if you press F1 and hover over various things, you can generate tooltips. I tend to just leave that as default. This is new for the display settings. This is new for this version of Disguise. If I just quickly drop in a video module, you can see at the moment the brightness value is normalized, so it's zero brightness is at 0, full brightness is at 1, but we can modify how that works. We can say that can run as a percentage, so from 0 to 100%, or we can say, I think there's like an 8-bit, 8-bit, so that one's from 0 to 255. So it's really just a preference thing. Depending on how you think about values, you can modify the way that these, and that can be done for the brightness, volume, and color values. So they can all be, if I just set that back to normalized. Movie output is once you have a show that you are happy with and you want to share that with your client, it's possible to do a screen recording, and these are the settings that will govern that. So as we go through our session today, I'll show you how to do a screen record. But the output settings are being set here. So that's the output codec type, frame rate, movie size, and then these two parameters allow you to add an amount of time on the front end of the video that you export. The screenshot format, you can just change the different type of file that generates. I've never had any reason to use anything with PNGs there. Latency modes, try and keep that at full speed. the lower latency modes are related to when you have video inputs, but we'll kind of get onto that when we do talk about video inputs, perhaps not today. Global refresh rate, this is really important. Depending on whether you're working in the US or Europe, you can set this to the appropriate frame rate for your, refresh rate for your area. So if you're working in the States, that's probably going to be 60 Hertz. If you're working in Europe, that's likely to be 50. Because I'm just on my studio machine, it doesn't really bear any isn't going to cause us any real issues. Not to be correct, because we're not going to try and genlock this system. Let's just try and get through the next few. Timeline audio device. This is a place where you can. These should be all the different audio devices on my system. So just some very simple audio. So if there's any audio generated on the timeline, these settings govern which sound card they're going to use. Deferred jump is on by default. That's the best way to show this. That's not doing what I thought it would. Let's see if the tooltip's any use. No. Okay. I'll come back to that if I work that out. Global crossfade duration. So at the moment, if I was to move anywhere along the timeline, so I start playing and move somewhere else, there would just be a hard cut, and global crossfades allows us to change that to be a fade. So we're going to come back and look at that when we have some media on that timeline. I think that's about it. Reset on stop when quantized. Yeah, we're not going to get into quantizing properly today, so it doesn't really make sense for us. You can add video overlays to various outputs, but we're not going to be able to see that today. Okay, so project settings really useful. Your media, we can have a look at this when we start adding some media, but the media manager is just a really good overview of all the different media files that we have available in our system. So we probably recognize some of the sample files here. Any file that is ingested into Disguise is going to turn up in this table, and it's just some very useful information in terms of version numbers, import date, file path, all that kind of stuff. So with being in Disguise, not having access to your Windows system while you do this, is quite a good place to look at some of the details about your media. D3 Net Manager relates to having a master-slave system. So if you have multiple Disguise systems all on the same network working together, this is how you add the different roles for each of those servers. So you do this. I could do that. I could make my system a master, and then if I had other Disguise servers, I could add them as slaves and understudies. If you don't understand the terms here, the master is the D3 that you are operating. So if you're sat at front of house on the show, the interface that you are looking at, like this right now, would be your master. Slaves are other Disguise servers in the system which are providing video outputs but are being controlled by the master. And then understudies, Disguise has a backup system. Previous to having this kind of understudy setup, we would have like a one-for-one backup. So for every server that we were using on the show, we would have to have a second one in order to be able to make that backed up. what the understudy system allows you to do is to have a single system that is able to take over from any other machine in your network. So this reduces the number of systems you need in order to be on a show and still maintain a decent level of backup coverage. So that's how the master, slave, and understudy system works, and this is where you configure it. So we would add, if we had other machines in the network, we would. So if I do, you'd add a name, and then add the host name. I haven't, because I'm in my studio, I've not got any other disguise systems on my network, so I can't see any. But this is where you would configure those. And press escape, and that's just going to get rid of that window. And if there's ever any windows open, so like this video module, I can just press escape to get rid of those. If there's something that I want to keep open, so like D3 Net Manager for example, I can press Control on the keyboard, left click on the X in the corner, and it changes the icon to a pin, and that has now made that window what we call a sticky window. So I can now press escape on the keyboard, and that's going to keep that there. So that's when you're working on something like a projector or something like that, and you want to keep that window up without accidentally pressing escape and getting rid of it. Setting a window to be a sticky window is a really cool way of keeping that open. Let's keep going down this menu. Sock Puppet. So if you want to control your disguise system using a lighting desk, this is where you would set up your patch and bank assignments. So if I say took a video module, I would be able to. So I'll clicked on that and dragged it into the patch assignment, and then these are your banks where you can control the addressing for different pieces of media. At the moment, we don't have any media in this bank, but we're just as simple as dragging and dropping media from our folder into there. I'm going to do a separate session on using Sock Puppet and DMX with Disguise, so we're not going to dig too deep into that today. But that's just to sort of know that that's there, and if you need to configure those things, they're found in this .d3 menu. Also, when you're working with DMX lights, there's just quite a handy place in the D3 menu where you can turn all the lamps on or off. So there we go. This section here just displays the name of your project. So this is what we set when we're in D3 Manager right at the start. Next along to the right is our track menu. So left clicking on this will show the tracks available in the show. A track is basically a single timeline. So if you see timeline along the bottom, it runs from left to right. If I wanted to have multiple different tracks, I could generate another one by typing in the name, hitting enter, and then if we left click to get back into that, we can see we now have two tracks, and the track that I'm in, by looking at the title on the bottom left here, is track 2. Let's see, there are some special settings here that relate to each of the tracks. Probably not going to get into that for now. It's a bit of a deeper dive, but the main thing to know here is left click and generate all the tracks. A good example of how I would use tracks is, say on a music gig, I would normally generate a track per song, or yeah, something like that. The stage menu is another very important part of the disguise layout. So if I right click this to open it, it all turns up, sort of folded up, but I can left click each of these triangles, and that will show me some of the different parameters inside here. I don't think it's going to be useful for me to go through every single option in here, but the scene options basically control things like the number of people and the size of the floor. So if you can see on the edge of the floor there, we can just change the size of that. If you're using models which aren't going to be video screens, the place to put them is inside your venue, so it's kind of useful to know that that's there. I think they give you by default a pre-set up venue with this stadium model in it. So if I wanted to add more models which weren't going to be video screens, I would add them to this menu here. This screen that we have in the centre of the stage here is a projection surface, and we can see that if we open the projection surfaces menu, we can also just below that open the projectors menu, and we can see the projector one, which is this guy in red down here. If I wanted to add other surfaces or LED screens to the to my project, I would go, so let's say I want another projection surface, I could do surface 2, and then so you in order to modify the parameters of an object, as I said at the start, you can use the 3D tools. So I could grab that and I could scale this to the size that I want this to be, and then use the axis to move this about. Or if I want to be more precise about the size of it, I can right click the surface, and this allows me to set values using numbers. So we can make this the same for make this 4 divided 1.778. Okay, so what I did there is I made the width of the screen 4, and then to make that a 16:9 screen, you can enter maths in these numbers, in these boxes. So I just did 4 divided 1.778, which is the ratio of 16 to 9. Press enter. The numbers here are all X, Y and Z. So if I modify this number here, I'm moving it left and right in the X axis. Second number up and down in the Y axis, and the third one Z. Same for rotation, X rotation, Y rotation, and then Z rotation. The last thing we're very quickly going to look at here is the resolution. If we have a look here, the screen that we got added to this guy's when we generated the project has already been set in HD, which is 1920 by 1080. Let's make this almost HD, so 720p, and that's set by entering the numbers in the resolution boxes here. That's your width resolution and your height resolution. So I can press escape to close all these windows, and then right click on the stage so that I can bring this box back up. In order to get, so this is a projection surface which will be interacted with by pointing a projector at it. We can also set a surface that's called, which is an LED screen. Let's make that the same size, 4 divided by 1.778, and we make that the same resolution. Okay. Again, we could move that around with the axis bands, or right click, and often I'll just mirror something, so 7.3 and 3.2. So by matching the numbers on the other surface, I know that the setup that I have here has symmetry down the centre, the same left and right. Escape to get rid of that. So the difference between projection surfaces and LED will become a little bit more obvious down the line. But the main thing to understand when you're generating them is if you're working on a projection show, you want to be creating surfaces, and if you're working with LED, you want to create LED screens. Let's have a look. This view that we're looking at now is our visualizer or 3D visualizer view. If I click on left click on the feed view on the feed button up here, this changes, and we're now looking at the feed view disguise. Basically, what the feed view is like a patching panel to allow us to allocate the video outputs of our system to various physical hardware outputs. So you can see this is the name of my desktop, and then I've got 3 monitors connected to this at the moment. So the GUI, and then 2 other monitors that I use for productivity. If I had a number of other disguise systems in my network, I would also be able to assign video to their outputs using the feed view. They appear below the machine that you're using down here. They only show up if you set them up in D3Net Manager. They won't turn up automatically. So here's D3Net Manager. So we actually have the slave that I generated when we were in that earlier. You can modify the number of feeds by going to D3Net Manager and modifying the feeds, or you can right click on the name of the machine and then right click there to generate that. If I was to say add an understudy now, that would also turn up below where we are in the feed view. So if I this white line is very important to the feed view. Basically, everything below that is the outputs that you have in your system, and everything above that is the assets that you have in your stage, which can generate video for you. So if I just quickly like a video, let's generate a test pattern. So if I create, I've put some video on my LED, as we can see in the visualizer view here. If I assign that to my GUI, we'll see that that allows me to set that content as a floating window. As like an overlay on top of my GUI, or if I was to, if you were able to see the other monitors on my system, these could also be set as this content could be set to output on those physical outputs. I'd also be able to set this on the so if I unlock that, scale it, I'd be able to set this up as on a physical output on a network machine. If I go to, you can see the LED turns up in the feed view straight away, as that's just a simple pixel for pixel output. If I duplicate my video track and change the mapping to surface 1, now my projector, because it's pointing at surface 1, gets to see that screen. In fact, let's make that different to make it a little bit easier to understand. So so we get to see that. There's nothing pointing at surface 2 at the moment, so there's no way of bringing that content into my outputs until we point a projector at that. So that's something quite important to remember. You can take your screens and apply them to outputs by right-clicking on them, add feed rectangle, and that'll add that down there. And then say I didn't want to use it on this output and I wanted to use it down here, then I can just left click that and move it about. If I want to use a portion of this screen, I can move my drag handles, and you can see that I'm changing the area of interest that I'm capturing using that. just set that back to HD. I can left click, and if I want to give this exact numbers, so set it actually back to exactly HD, I can enter those numbers there. Or if I go to the top left, I can enter numbers, and that moves the feed output to the coordinates that we're setting here. So if I was to set that at 540, something like that, that would move the output there. What you saw me do with the LED output is I scaled that up from 1280 720 all the way up to full HD, and I did that. If you unclick the lock icon here, then you can scale that without. So the handles normally with the lock closed change the area of interest that you're looking at, and if we unlock that, we can now scale the resolution of that output. We can flip these, so say we were using a projector in rear mode. Instead of having to go to the projector menu, we could flip that, or we could flip it upside down if you're hanging it upside down. You can cut these feed rectangles and move them like that. If this is something, this is more useful for LED than it is for projection, but you can cut your feed up into any number of pieces. Zooming using the scroll wheel on the mouse allows me to zoom in, or if I select a feed rectangle that I'm interested in, I can press the F on the keyboard, and that's going to zoom right into, make that the center focus of my screen. I can just scroll on my mouse wheel to bring that out to something a little bit more usable. Yeah, the scissors cut, if I click and hold, I can change the amount of screen that I'm cutting, so I can change the size that I'm cutting. So if I just want to cut a very tiny bit off the top, I can do that. And then for anything that you want to remove from your feed outputs, you just left click the bin, and they get deleted and go away. The other way to generate, so that was right click, add feed rectangle. I'm just going to bin that. You can also, if you hold Alt on the keyboard, you can left click and drag that to the screen that you want to add that to. Let go, and then that adds that straight away. So that's just another way of being able to add your screens to your output heads. There's a few other things. Once you have multiple disguise servers within your system, your global settings and Genlock settings are able to be modified from in here. And as we get into like a more in-depth thing, by right-clicking on these feeds, this is where we can modify the warp, and we can add masks and soft edges and what have you. So we'll come back to this when we look at that part of the software. So in order to move between my feed and my stage view or my visualizer view, I just left click. So left click on stage to get back to stage, left click on feed to get back to feed. So that's pretty easy. We're going to just continue moving along the top bar here. So transport, this relates to external signals that we might use to control our disguise system. Timecode being the most obvious one. This is where we would, if we had an incoming timecode source, we could, so I might say I've got an LTC source, generate that, and then this gives me the different types of timecode, and then I would just set whether it was my left or right line, and you can also say which audio interface you're going to be using to bring that in. There's some other event transports allow you to use MIDI, OSC, and ArtNet to control your system. The schedule allows you to basically do time of day based. So you can generate. Yeah, here we go. So we can generate actions within our system based on day of the week, time and duration. We're not going to dig into that right away, but it's just kind of useful to know that that's there and it can be used. Set lists become more important if we're using a multi-transport manager, but ultimately, if I use the up and down keys here to move between my different tracks, set lists can govern like groups of tracks that are sort of kept together. The diagnostics and the playback monitor aren't going to be like useful for you right away. So if you wanted to add a MIDI or an OSC controller to your disguise system, this is where you would set up those commands. And talking of adding devices to your system, the actual hardware configurations live in the devices menu, so that's the next one along there. If I had a capture card in my studio machine, I would be able to look at video inputs. On a proper disguise server, you'd have all your video inputs here. If you have multiple systems, so we can now see this is my studio machine plus the dummy slave learn studies that I created. You can set the audio output patch on a machine by machine basis. So if you have a complicated audio setup for your show, this is where you configure that. The DMX patch editor becomes a lot more important when you're working with Disguise and Sock Puppet. So as I mentioned, I'm going to do a separate session on Sock Puppet and Disguise, so we'll use that there. Projector control editor will be more important when we have a load of projectors. But if we look in here, this is where we would add external devices. So by left clicking on the plus, we can go and add like an OSC device, which would allow us to use an iPad or another computer to control our disguise system. Or if we wanted to add like a MIDI controller, this is where we would add. So any external device, if you ever look down this list, there's also video matrices, Barco Encore, Telnet devices. Is really all the kind of different hardware that you can see you're using alongside your disguise system, but outside of the machine itself. Last two bits along the top, we've got brightness output, or so if I don't think this gets visualized here. No. So on the actual output, this allows me to fade my whole system to black. So in lighting terms, we would call this a grandmaster. And then the same, this is a global volume control to manage the overall audio volume that we have on our system. And then the last one is our system currently is active because it's faded up. I can left click this and fade it down, and now none of the outputs of my system would be sending anything, so essentially sent my system to black. I can also use the backspace key to fade between those two, and then quite useful if you're working with LED, you can set your system to hold, so this will now keep the outputs that I've got set held, and I could now continue to do programming, and we'd still, although this will track what I'm doing within the visualizer, the actual hardware output would be being held. So it allows your LED team to work with a test pattern while you continue to do some programming. Okay, so our last bit of interface stuff before we start looking at some programming. Along the bottom here we have our timeline, as mentioned. We have a few different types of play mode. So let's just as a timeline moves from left to right, if I press the sort of play mode, it's called play. It's just the standard play mode. This will basically play with it, ignoring any other markers that we might have on the timeline. If I press Alt S, I can create a split. So if I use that, it ignores the fact that there is a split there and just keeps playing. If we left this to play, it would continue playing to the timeline without end of the timeline without stopping. We obviously have the stop and the left and right keys. These move to the last split marker that you have. So if I go left and right, it's jumping between those splits. This will allow me to show you the other play modes. So if I use this one and jump that to just before, this will play and hold at the end of that section, which is quite useful to use. And then the third play mode that we have is play loop. So if I do that and set it to play loop, when we get to the end of that section, that'll just jump back and start at the beginning of that section again. So if I create another Alt S to create the split, you can see that's jumping back to the start of that section there. Rather than so if I move further up the timeline and click left once, you see I jump back to the start of that section. Rather than having to click 3 times to get to back to the start, or even 10 times or more if I have multiple different sections, I can just press the return to start button here, and that'll take me all the way back to the beginning of my whole timeline. So I mentioned we have some different tracks here. So at the moment we're in track 2. If we wanted to move to track 1, where we don't have any programming, we can use the up and down arrow keys, and that allows us to move between the tracks. And then we have a record button. This becomes more important when we have incoming data like automation data or OSC data. This can help us record that data to the timeline and use it to help inform our programming. It's quite difficult to demonstrate this without incoming data, so I might save that for another session where I can perhaps set something up externally to show how that works. As I was saying, Alt S creates a split in the timeline. I can join those back together by pressing Alt M. You can also right click on any part of the timeline and you can go split section, or you can go merge section. So that's just what these Alt S and Alt M are, splitting and merging. If I press Alt S or I right click on anywhere on the timeline, I can also add a note. So this might be band on stage or something like that. I can also right click, delete that note. I can add tags. So if we were using incoming timecode, I could say that this part of the show is going to start when timecode gets to 9 hours. We can also use this to set sort of MIDI notes, or we can set arbitrary cue numbers, which tend to get used if we're using like OSC. You can also set cue numbers using like xx.yy. So you could set a cue like that, which some lighting desks seem to prefer. So right clicking on the timeline brings this menu up, which allows us to add modules to the timeline. So if you see, as part of this demo already, I've added 2 video modules. If I just move up the timeline a little bit further over here, I go, so right clicking, new layer, you can give that a name, so my video module. Or if I just delete that, I could just right click, new layer, ignore that, and then it would be named based on the type of module that I added to it. delete that once more. I can also do Control L on the keyboard. That skips the first menu that we looked at, and I can just pick the type of module that I want to add. You'll see if I just close my media picker that these modules are essentially empty when we first bring them up and start using them. So in terms of the video module here, this is empty. Like, you can go to the video option and pick one of the pieces of media and bring that in. If we have a quicker look, the video module is one of the modules that you're most likely to use, because this is how you're going to bring your media into your show. So I mean, if we just go and have a quick look down, the modules that that you're most likely to use, certainly when you're first starting to use Disguise, are the video module for video and stills content, the audio module for audio files, and then the web module can be quite useful. Allows you to bring websites, HTML5 websites into your Disguise system. There's lots of other different type of modules here. It's outside the scope of this tutorial to go through every single one and what they do. You probably wouldn't use them that much either. The other one to just quickly point out is the notch. So if I wanted to bring notch content into my system, that I would have to generate a notch module like that. Again, that comes in empty, and I would have to add a notch block into that in order to make that work. So I'm able to left click and move this media up and down the timeline, which is, as I mentioned, a little bit like video editing in a non-linear video editor. I can change the length of that by left clicking on this arrow at the end and moving that about. If I change this from a still, which is just has a single frame, to a piece of video content, I can then right click on that and say fit to contents. So now my module is matching the length of the video. If I was to stretch this out significantly longer than the length of the video, when this gets to the end, the video is going to loop, and does that by default. This video is quite erratic, so it's quite difficult to see where it loops. But if we reopen our video module, we can see by looking in the video menu, the length of the grey bar here is the unique media, and then everywhere, so this is where the loop would be, and everywhere after that we're essentially looping. So this is, say, unique area of media. Like I say, by default it loops. We can change that behavior. So if I go change the at endpoint option, I can change that to pause. So now if I play that, we can see that that's paused on the last frame of the video. One of the other options in that is to ping pong. So once we get to the end, it's now going to start playing that in reverse, and then when it gets back to frame 0, it'll start playing it forward again. So call that ping pong. The reason that this content is playing back on the Surface 1 here is because we've told it to do that in the mapping type. So here, when you generate new screens inside your project, new mappings or direct mappings are generated for you. So if I wanted to move this content onto Surface 2, I would just select the second surface. What I've done there, and the reason it didn't play back on Surface 2, is I've generated a keyframe. So I can right click to delete that keyframe, left click to bring my playhead right to the start where that first keyframe is, and now click Surface 2, and that's replaced the keyframe that we have right at the start of the module. And these sets of bars represent the time within the clip that you're playing back. So if I go to the opacity parameter, I can then use this to keyframe the opacity within the clip. There we go. So as we play through that, that's going to respect the programming that I've put onto the opacity. If I want to, if I decide I don't like that, I can right click each of these keyframes to delete them, or left click to pick it up and to move that about. At the moment, if I move, so I can move the playhead backwards and forwards by increments of a second by using the left and right keys on my keyboard. It's to do with the scaling that we have on our, or like a zoom level that we have on our timeline, that the increments there are a second. If you look right in the bottom left hand corner, there's a minus magnifying glass and a plus magnifying glass. If I click the plus, we've come all the way into the largest magnifying level. So if I move left and right now, I'm moving in increments of 1 frame. When I come back, I can come back out, I'll be back to a second, and then that's jumping 5 seconds at a time, which is our sort of largest level. So depending on how detailed the work that you want to do, you can zoom in and out of your timeline using the plus and minus buttons here. You can also, if you've held Alt on your keyboard and then scroll your mouse button, that will allow you to change your zoom level there. So that also applies just on the timeline that you're looking at on a parameter. So holding Alt and scrolling the mouse button allows me to change the different zoom levels for that. So if I do, so if I get that all the way out, a second is a very small area of there. If I zoom all the way in, now these markers represent frames and I can do much more detailed work. So I think seconds is quite a good way to work. These this kind of keyframe control can be done on pretty much any parameter. So if I grab a color parameter, I can maybe set that there. So I've moved, the way the color works here is it's an XY coordinate based on this bitmap. So I've moved the Y all the way to the bottom, and now if I keyframe the X value, that's going to change the color quite significantly. So if I just close that and have a look at what my programming looks like, you can see how the color shifts being changed on that clip. Again, I can go back in here. This time, if I hold Shift on the keyboard, I can select all those keyframes that I generated, and I can go delete keyframes by right-clicking. There's a number of different, if I just generate some more quick keyframes to show you, there's a number of different options you get in that menu. So you can say copy keyframes, paste keyframes if I had anything in the copy bin, cut keyframes, delete keyframes after or delete keyframes before. There's lots of different ways. It can be quite powerful. You can change the interpolation between keyframes, so I can set that to linear, so it's a straight line. Cubic sets it back so that basically eases the in and the out, and then select basically holds, and then at the point of the keyframe it will jump to the, so if I do that using select, it snaps that value rather than fading between them. I can go delete, select them all and delete, and we'll go back to the beginning. If I wanted to go back to the way the video looked at the start, I can just remove all that. And all the different parameters that we have here on this video module can all be keyframed in exactly the same way, so brightness, contrast, saturation and so on, including things like moving, so scaling. You can stretch your clip, although I wouldn't recommend it for something like this. It's totally possible, or move it left and right. Cool. So using the keyframing within your video module and the different video modules that you have on your timeline, you can start to build up the programming for your show. I'm just going to reset these back to fairly sensible values. So if I was to take, I think it's video 1, video 1, okay. So if I was to take another video and apply that to Surface 2, let's do that. You'll see how the video that we have here is right in front, is in front. There's like a Z order to the way that the video clip stacks. So the clip at the top of your timeline here is in front, and then anything below that is behind. We can prove this by going to the opacity value and setting a keyframe to drop that. We can now see our content below it. We can use this to essentially fade between different clips of content. So if I set that to 0 and then fade in, now we can do that to blend different pieces of content together. The other way that we can blend content together is by using the blend mode. So at the moment we're in alpha blend mode, which means that the opacity is going to govern whether or not we can see the clips between each other. But if we set this something to like multiply, like screen, we can see. So these work in exactly the same way as you would see in like Photoshop or After Effects or something like that. So yeah, let's just set that back to alpha. Let's see what time we're on. We managed to use up an hour already. Let's just go through mappings, and then perhaps we'll call it today, and we can get into some more advanced topics next week, having sort of set a fairly good foundation for how to navigate around Disguise and how to add your media onto the timeline. So, as I mentioned very briefly when we were talking about moving content between different screens, we have what Disguise calls a mapping or mapping type. So at the moment the content is being mapped directly to Surface 2, and because it's a direct map, we're respecting the UV for this screen, which means as the UV starts from top left and moves down to bottom right, so will the content get mapped in exactly that same way. If we wanted to keyframe so we start on Surface 2, I'm going to move a little bit further up the timeline. I could left click and I could say move that to Surface 1. So as we play through, you would that content would snap to different mapping. There are more mapping types aside from direct. So, I mean, if we just wanted to continue that demo, we could go from Surface 1 to Surface 2 to LED. Surface 2, LED. There are multiple different mapping types, as I was saying. So that's a direct map. The next mapping type that's probably worth looking at is called a feed mapping. So I'm just going to generate a new mapping, give it a name. I could call this any name I liked here, but in the name of keeping this organised, I'm going to call it just a feed map. These are all the different type of mapping types that we have. Click feed. So the way this works, this is very similar to our feed view, which we have here, except now we're working on a content level. So if I go to my feed map, we have our content, which is at the top of the white line. I'm just going to modify this to be the same resolution as my content. I'm pretty sure this is HD, so that would be 1920 by 1080. Oh, little visualizer bug there. Let's just close that because that's kind of unpleasant. I could also have right-clicked on my content, and that would give me an information panel, which would show me the different types of information that I have for this clip. So I right-clicked my feed, and I'm looking back inside this feed mapping. By setting this resolution, I'm now looking at the whole of my content. I can now go into my screens and add some of the different, so it actually sees a projector as a screen, but the ones that we're going to focus on are the ones that we've added to the project deliberately. So Surface 1, Surface 2 and LED. So now, in the same way that we can, oh, that doesn't work. I can, so it goes the other way around, doesn't it? So I can now add these different surfaces to the content. So right click and add feed rectangle. So now we've got our content and Surface 1. I'm just going to remove this, this other video clip to make this a little bit easier to understand. We've got our content and we've attached that to Surface 1. We could also add rectangle and add that to Surface 2 and LED. So if we move this out of the way, we can see that the contents, you see we still have the timeline programming in here for the different mappings. So I'm just going to right click and get rid of those. So as you can see, the content is now, that single piece of content is now being played out across the different screens. We're not seeing all of that on our surface and our LED, because if we pop back into our feed view, or our feed mapping, we see that the Surface 2 is only looking at this portion of the content. The reason for that is this screen is 1280 by 720, whereas the content is 1920 by 1080. We could, if we wanted to, by clicking up here, we could stretch that. So now our 1920 content is being scaled up to fit our screen. We could do the same for our LED, or we could just see a different portion of that. So if we just want to see the bottom right, again, this is all reflected out in our feed view. So this is a really good way of taking one piece of content and mapping it to lots of different screens, and you can really change the way that the mappings sample the different pieces of content. I use this a lot when I'm doing big LED shows. I might give a content creator one big 4K map, and then I might have hundreds of screens on stage that all need to sample a different part of that. And that feed maps allowed me to do that. You can, although I wouldn't recommend it, essentially squash your content. So if you tell one screen to only sample that content but stretch it all over the full size of the screen, you'll see that that's reflected there. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but you could. So if I just click here and look at 115 by 720, I could match those numbers. And then we can see on our output that we are correctly seeing that, but it's only showing. We could do, I could duplicate that and move that. So if I wanted to create some kind of creative output like that, your creativity is really your limit in terms of everything that can be kind of done with the feed mapping. A bit like our feed view, we can do things like cutting it. So I now have two different sections, and then that could be reflected in our output mapping here. I can also change the size here as well, so I can take that all of that content and squash that down. It's really whatever your creativity or the needs of your show leads you to do. I'm just gonna stretch that back out, and then in order to make this work, I'm going to set that back to 1280, which is the full size of that screen. There we've got our content mapped over our three screens. The next mapping type that we're going to look at is what's called a parallel mapping. So I'm going to left click on the mapping, come here, put a name in to generate a new one. So the way that this works, I'll just set this to the size of my content. There's kind of a UI frustration here where your projection is square, so I need to basically set that to aspect to off. I'm going to set the size of my content, and I can turn aspect back on. And now if I scale this, it's going to snap that to the size of the content. If I just add a screen, so let's say surface 1, the way this works is we have this GUI sort of visual of the projection. So this is taking the content in a flat way and pushing it into our scene. So if I just pull the position of that back, you can see how the projection is only hitting the very bottom of that screen, and the content is pushed into the scene in this is why this is called a parallel map, in a parallel fashion. And if I was to change the position of this projection, then that would change the way. The power in this really is when you have multiple overlapping screens. So if I move that and I move that back, you can see how the content just keeps going further and further back into the stage. Now the red is showing me where my mapping is smaller than the screens that I have. So if I was to change the size of my mapping to cover all of them, we lose the red. And then without having to do any maths or calculations, we have this content perfectly mapping these based on where they are in the Z order in 3D space. If we wanted to dynamically update this, we could just move these screens around, and that would allow us to change which part of the content that we're sampling. Do the same for any of these really. This is where having the axis gizmo, it makes this quite powerful. Previously we would have had to gone in, right clicked, and then you can still scroll these, but it's much more intuitive to be able to click an axis band and move that about. So that's our parallel map, or parallel mapping. Go left click, and now the next one I'm going to show you is perspective. This works in a very similar way to our parallel mapping. Again, I'm going to add the resolution of our content. I'm going to add some screens. Maybe not the projector. So the eye point is the very end of the point here. I'm going to move that back. We can move that up a bit. So immediately, as you can see with the red showing me where the mapping isn't covering the screens, it's looking very similar to a parallel map. The difference between a perspective mapping is that if you see as the content, a little bit like the way a projector works, if you're really close to the eye point, then the content is really small. And as we see with the white projection cone getting bigger and bigger, as we move the screen further and further away, the content is being mapped in a bigger and bigger way because of that. And this is really powerful when you've got screens that are not connected, but need to kind of receive that mapping in a perspective kind of way. This is also really useful for 3D generated content. If you match the values, the field of view, and the position of your 3D camera, you can reproject your content back onto your model in a way that matches your 3D world. So perhaps that's something that I can show in a different tutorial. So yeah, again, we can move these around. So if this was a parallel mapping, the content would be the same size wherever we were in the scene, whereas with the perspective mapping, the content gets bigger and bigger the further back we go from the eye point, which is like the content source. So I think have a quick look at our mapping list. Our direct mapping is the one that's generated automatically, and the one that we would use if we were using any sort of custom models and our own UVs. I think a lot of the others are kind of niche use cases, which we might get to in a more advanced tutorial, but perhaps we'll hold off on that today. This session has already got to 1 hour 20 minutes. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for joining us for Friday sessions once again, and we'll pick this up next week, where we'll take this and we'll do some more advanced work inside of Disguise, building on the foundation that we learned today. So thank you everybody, and see you all next week.